Good morning, everybody. My name's Janice Kimball, and I'm honored to be here today to give the Thanksgiving Day presentation for the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Ajijic, Mexico, the home of my heart. Today's service will focus on the misconceptions as well as the joys regarding the origin of our celebration in the United States. I love Thanksgiving, the secular holiday set aside to give thanks for our blessings, gorge on turkey, stuffing, and devour pumpkin pie. But then I'm a celebration junkie, not prone to examine any of these too closely. For is the one thing I surmise, those of us from north of the border suffer from a lack of celebration and the joy it brings to the soul. However, in a quest for truth and meaning, conscious-seeking adults have come to realize it is past time to separate the facts from the fiction in many of our celebrations. Webster Dictionary states that Thanksgiving Day is an annual holiday in the United States and Canada celebrating the harvest and other blessings of the year. But as a child, I knew that Thanksgiving was much more than that. I knew that it was about sharing and brotherhood. It was about the Pilgrims and Indians coming together in peace to share a meal. I learned that in grade school. And then again, I suppose just in case I didn't remember the lessons from that time, in junior high, I was taught the same lesson over again in American history. I remember the beautifully rendered painting of the first Thanksgiving in our history books. The setting of the illustration of that peaceful gathering in 1621 was pastoral, almost biblical in nature. The table was laden with turkey, stuffing, cranberries, and pie. I remember the black pop hats on the male pilgrims replete with buckle, their wives lovely and demure in gathered dresses. A long table laden with food, the Indians draped in lavish feathers. The only thing missing in this idyllic vision, it might seem, were the sound of songbirds. Why wasn't it pointed out to us students that the first Thanksgiving Day illustration in our history books was a fantasy? That it was painted by Jean-Louis Jerome Ferris in 1899, over 250 years after that first Thanksgiving Day in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And that the artist wasn't even English, and that the Pilgrims didn't wear hats like this, and that the Indians in that artist's painting were dressed from those for the Great Plains and not at all like those on the East Coast. Cripes, I was just a child. How would I know that what I was being taught in my history wasn't history? Now, Encyclopedia notes that American Thanksgiving is particularly rich in legend and symbolism, which includes feasting on turkey, bread stuffing, potatoes, and pumpkin pie. And I'm going to continue to quote, Plymouth Thanksgiving began with a few columnists going out fowling, possibly for turkey, but most likely for the easier prey of geese or ducks. Next, 90 or so Wampanoag Indians made a surprise appearance at the settlement's gate, doubtlessly unnerving 50 or so columnists. Nevertheless, now I'm continuing to quote Encyclopedia Britannica here. Over the next few days, the two groups socialized without incidents. The Wampanoag contributed venison to the feast and probably fish, eels, shells, stews, vegetables, and beer. Since Plymouth, Massachusetts had few buildings or manufactured goods, most people ate while sitting on the ground or on barrels with plates in their laps. This disorderly affair sealed a treaty that lasted until King Philip's War in 1675, where hundreds of colonists and thousands of Indians lost their lives. Now, in 2017, only 4 years ago, an article in the New York Times that was referencing previously lost historical documents states that there was no mention of Turkey being at the 1621 bounty, and there was no pie. Yeah. Settlers lacked butter and wheat and flour for a crust, and they had no ovens for baking. What is known for sure is that the Pilgrims harvested crops and the Wampanoag brought 5 deer. Experts agree that although there was certainly some wild fowl served along with the venison, there is no direct evidence proving that turkey, in fact, was served. The end of quote. Well, Encyclopedia Britannica, at least you didn't claim there was turkey at that Thanksgiving Day meal, but you got everything else wrong. So what about your claim that most people ate with plates on their laps? Historians universally agree that there were about 50 pilgrims at this fair, along with 90 Indians. That's 140 people. That's a lot of dishes. And dishwashing. Or did white society's version of Thanksgiving reveal that perhaps the Indians were regarded as savages, not considered as part of the people? And since encyclopedias are regarded as a source of fact, what about this surprise appearance doubtlessly unnerving the colonists? Other factual accounts of the first Thanksgiving state that the Indians were invited, and your statement of facts, Encyclopedia Britannica, implies that the Wampanoag crashed your party. Research has brought no clear-cut description of the history or perhaps even gave fabrications of Thanksgiving. Therefore, I began to research to explore our national holiday from a different point of view. Racial justice in the U.S. came to the forefront in 2020 with the coronavirus pandemic disproportionately affecting people of color, and police brutality drawing attention across the United States, the U.S., and the world. In addition to these injustices is the until recently hidden history of church and civil authorities, both in Canada and in the United States, of kidnapping Indigenous children from their families and their culture to be raised as Christians. They were confined to what amounted to barrack-like conditions where they were subject to abuse and where many died and were buried in unmarked graves. Because of these recent revelations, there is a growing population with the desire to reevaluate the meaning and celebration of Thanksgiving. This dissent has created an undercurrent that we can no longer ignore. In 1970, descendants of the early Pilgrims planned a banquet to celebrate the anniversary of the landing of the Mayflower in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and asked Wamsutta Frank James, a Wampanoag Indian, to make a speech. Now here is an excerpt from that speech. Today, we must work toward a more humane America, a more Indian America, where men and nature once again are important, where the Indian values of honor, truth, and brotherhood prevail. You, the white men, are celebrating an anniversary. We, the Wampanoags, will help you celebrate in the concept of a new beginning. It was the beginning of a new life for the Pilgrims. Now, 350 years later, it is the beginning of a new determination of the original Americans, the American Indian. And we are determined, and our presence here is this evening, this living testimony that this is only the beginning of the American Indian, particularly the Wampanoags, to regain possession of this country that is rightfully ours. It should come as no surprise that the descendants of the Pilgrims did not allow Frank James to make this speech. While his speech didn't praise the Pilgrims of the descendants, they offered to write him a different version in praise of the Pilgrims. The anger and frustration stemming from the Pilgrims' descendants' refusal to hear his speech drove Wamsutta and a group of his followers to meet at the top of Coal Hill in Plymouth on the following Thanksgiving Day. It was there on November 27, 1970, that the commemoration of the first National Day of Mourning was held. Last year, on the 50th annual observance of the National Day of Mourning, in a show of unity, Indigenous people from around the world spoke at a live-streamed event. Indigenous communities worldwide, as well as the U.S., have been disproportionately impacted from COVID-19 pandemic. This is the reason a representative of the Navajo Nation, which had been hit hardest of the tribal nations, said that in 2020, National Day of Mourning observers focused on the pandemic. Many of the indigenous peoples of America's fast from sundown on the night of mourning to remember the hardships and genocide their ancestors faced. I expect that with the unraveling of hidden crimes against indigenous children now being exposed, that this year's day of mourning will be particularly sad. A plaque has now been erected by the town of Plymouth, Massachusetts, on behalf of the United American Indians of New England. Here is what it says. To the Native Americans, Thanksgiving Day is a reminder of the genocide of millions of their people, the theft of their lands, and the relentless assault of their cultures. Participants in National Day of Mourning honor Native ancestors and the struggles of Native peoples to survive today. It is a day of remembrances and spiritual connection, as well as a protest of the racism and oppression which Native Americans continue to experience. Hopefully, we're on the cusp of making a retribution for crimes we had in the past denied. As an optimist, I believe that we are taking a step forward in our evolution. Yet, we cannot afford to continue to gloss over the brutal side of our humanity if we are not to repeat it. As the most dangerous and unpredictable mammal on earth, we must come to terms with the often unthinkable deeds and atrocities that we are capable of committing. We must search for truth and meaning and question what our news feed and media tell us, lest we be brainwashed by their self-serving motives. This awareness needs to be a conscious decision, because it does require some discipline and effort. We must do this to preserve the best of that which makes us human. On the brighter side, most contemporary historians now agree that the Thanksgiving celebration in Plymouth was a cross-cultural moment with food, games, and prayer. I think we can embrace these shards of fairness and idealism whenever we find them in our past and recognize them and give them credit to them and celebrate the image of brotherhood, sharing and being thankful for that which we are blessed.